the Black Lives Matter movement. These are the people who have ruined the life of Darren Wilson, the officer who was defending his own life against a street thug named Michael Brown, who attacked him in his police car, reaching for his gun. Now, how many people out in the television audience would do something like that? That tells you everything you need to know about him. He wasn't picked on by Darren Wilson because he was black. He was picked on because he had just committed a strong-arm robbery. The lie, hands up, don't shoot, that Michael Brown was alleged to say was invented by his accomplice in the robbery. This is the civil rights hero of today. Or Freddie Gray, or Garner. Career predators. And who do they prey on? They prey on the black community.
Does the truth matter? Not to groups like Black Lives Matter. That's tragic for many reasons, not the least of which is that black lives are being lost as a result. When it comes to the subject of American police, blacks, and the deadly use of force, here is what we know. A recent deadly force study by Washington State University researcher Lois James found that police officers were less likely to shoot unarmed black suspects than unarmed white or Hispanic ones in simulated threat scenarios. Harvard economics professor Roland Fryer analyzed more than 1,000 officer-involved shootings across the country. He concluded that there is zero evidence of racial bias in police shootings. In Houston, he found that blacks were 24% less likely than whites to be shot by officers, even though the suspects were armed or violent. Does the truth matter? An analysis of the Washington Post's police shooting database and of federal crime statistics reveals that fully 12% of all whites and Hispanics who die of homicide are killed by cops. By contrast, only 4% of black homicide victims are killed by cops. But isn't it a sign of bias that blacks make up 26% of police shooting victims, but only 13% of the national population? It is not, and common sense suggests why. Police shootings occur more frequently where officers confront armed or violently resisting suspects. Those suspects are disproportionately black. According to the most recent study by the Department of Justice, although blacks were only about 15% of the population in the 75 largest counties in the U.S., they were charged with 62% of all robberies, 57% of murders, and 45% of assaults. In New York City, blacks commit over 3/4 of all shootings, though they are only 23% of the city's population. Whites, by contrast, commit under 2% of all shootings in the city, though they are 34% of the population. New York's crime disparities are repeated in virtually every racially diverse city in America. The real problem facing inner-city black communities today is not the police, but criminals. In 2014, over 6,000 blacks were murdered, more than all white and Hispanic homicide victims combined. Who is killing them? Not the police and not white civilians, but other blacks. In fact, a police officer is 18.5 times more likely to be killed by a black male than an unarmed black male is to be killed by a police officer. If the police ended all use of lethal force tomorrow, it would have a negligible impact on the black death by homicide rate. In Chicago, through just the first 6.5 months of 2016, over 2,300 people were shot. That's a shooting an hour during some weekends. The vast majority of the victims were black. During the same period, the Chicago police shot 12 people, all armed and dangerous. That's 0.5% of all shootings. Does the truth matter? If it does, here's a truth worth pondering. There is no government agency more dedicated to the proposition that Black Lives Matter than the police. The proactive policing revolution that began in the mid-1990s has dramatically brought down the inner city murder rate and saved tens of thousands of Black lives. Unfortunately, that crime decline is now in jeopardy. As I write in my book, The War on Cops, police officers are backing off of proactive policing in Black neighborhoods thanks to the false narrative that police officers are infected with homicidal bias. As a result, violent crime is going up. In cities with large Black populations, homicides in 2015 rose anywhere from 54% in Washington, D.C. to 90% in Cleveland. Overall, in the nation's 56 largest cities, homicides in 2015 rose 17%, a nearly unprecedented one-year spike. Many law-abiding residents of high-crime areas beg the police to maintain order, precisely the type of policing that the ACLU, progressive politicians, and the Obama Justice Department denounce as racist. This is tragic because when the police refrain from proactive policing, Black lives are lost. Lost because of a myth. The best research and data reach this conclusion. There is no evidence that police are killing Blacks just because they're Black. You now have the truth. Does it matter? I'm Heather McDonald of the Manhattan Institute for Prager University.
Things that I wanted to share with you. According to Pew Research, the net worth of white families in 2013 was $141,000. For Black families, it was $11,000, even less than the $19,000 it was in 2007. According to economist Edward Wolf of the University of New York, excluding vehicles and other durables, the median Black family worth is just $1,700, while 40% of Black families have zero or negative wealth. White family worth, in terms of financial worth, is 69 times more than that of Black families. Given this disparity, how can you argue that racism is not a driving factor in income inequality?
Because it has nothing to do with race and everything to do with culture. And when you have a culture that doesn't, you know what? Explain to me. You explain to me why Black kids aren't graduating high school. Explain that one to me. Explain to me why Black kids are shooting each other in rates significantly higher than whites are shooting each other. Explain to me why 13% of the population is responsible for 50% of the murder. Explain to me why the number of Black kids in prison, not for innocent reasons, not for walking down the street and getting pulled into a prison, is so high. Explain, if it has nothing to do with culture, explain to me why the single motherhood rate in the Black community jumped from 20% to 70% in the same course of time that the civil rights movement has made such tremendous strides. Is America more racist now than it was in 1960? And if it is, please explain to me how that happened.
What is it with Blacks and police? Blacks can't do wrong, but police can? It's not the police department that's going through the Black neighborhood killing people. And anecdotal evidence to the contrary does not make a pandemic. Because no matter how you can parse those numbers to make them show that while 49% of people that are shot by police are white and only 30% are Black, they can parse those numbers to make them depict whatever they want. The bottom line is, and we don't have to look further, 50% of murders are committed by Blacks. That's 50% on the whole. Police have a job to do. Black people aren't making it easy. As a matter of fact, a lot of people aren't making it easy. But Blacks are going out of their way. You know, if I'm a cop and I have to pull over a Black person, I'm walking up to the window with my handgun ready to be drawn. Because if not, I'm in a situation like was with Castile, where he didn't have a carry permit and he had a gun on his leg with his hand on it. Look, folks. Bad decisions lead to bad consequences. In 2014, 494 people shot by police were white. 258 were Black, 172 were Hispanic, 38 other, and 28 unknown. That's 990 people shot, killed. We don't have a police problem. We have a black crime problem. We don't have a police racism problem. We have a black racism toward police, toward authority, toward propriety, toward modernity. That's the problem we have. Blacks can't behave like animals and expect there not to be consequences. Look, you're not going to hear this anywhere else. You're not going to hear it anywhere else. Malik Shabazz and all these other boo-boo, doo-doo, voodoo people that claim to be lawyers and new Black Panthers and da-da-da-da-da, they can say whatever they want. But we don't have to go far. Drive into these neighborhoods and see how these people behave. They refuse. With their complicit compadres, the media and cultural Marxists, you don't have to go any further than to drive into their neighborhoods and look at how they live and treat one another. Going to church on Sunday, saying amen, and walking out the door with a gang, walking out the door of the church and having three dreadlock hoodlums go by spraying bullets, that ought to tell you something. It's not the police. It's the people. I'm Michael Massey. I'm the publisher and founder of The Daily Rant, michael-massey.com.
Is racism still a major problem in America? President Barack Obama certainly thinks so. He said that racism is in our DNA. Really? If racism is in our DNA, doesn't that mean it's immutable, unchangeable? But America has changed, and dramatically so. In 1960, 60% of Americans said they would never vote for a black president. Almost 50 years later, the black man who said racism is in America's DNA was elected president, and 4 years later, re-elected. That's only the most obvious example of racial progress. There are many others. Take interracial marriage. As William H. Fry of the Brookings Institution wrote, sociologists have traditionally viewed multiracial marriage as the benchmark for the ultimate stage of assimilation of a particular group into society. Black-white marriages were still illegal in 16 states until 1967, and a 1958 Gallup poll found that only 4% of Americans approved of black-white marriages. Today, that number is 87%. In 1960, of all marriages by blacks, only 1.7% were black-white. Today, it's 12% and rising. Now, what about racial profiling and abuse of blacks by police? Doesn't that prove that racism remains a major problem? In the summer of 2014, Ferguson, Missouri became ground zero for this accusation when a white policeman shot and killed an unarmed black teenager. While a Department of Justice investigation of the incident cleared the officer of any wrongdoing, it did accuse the city's police department of racial bias. But what was the Justice Department's report's most headline-grabbing stat? The gap between the percentage of blacks living in Ferguson, 67%, and the percentage of those stopped by police for traffic violations who are black, 85%, an 18-point discrepancy. Racism, right? Not so fast. Blacks comprise 25% of New York City, but account for 55% of those stopped for traffic offenses, a 30-point discrepancy, far bigger than that of Ferguson. Why isn't the NYPD, a department that is now majority-minority, considered even more institutionally racist than the Ferguson PD? The answer is you cannot have an honest discussion about police conduct without an honest discussion of black crime. Though blacks are 13% of the population, they commit 50% of the nation's homicides. And almost always the victim is another black person, just as most white homicides are against other whites. In 2012, according to the Center for Disease Control, police killed 123 blacks, while, by the way, killing over twice that many whites. But that same year, blacks killed over 6,000 people, again, mostly other blacks. What about traffic stops? Unlike when responding to dispatch calls, police officers exercise more discretion when it comes to traffic stops. Therefore, racist cops can have a field day when it comes to traffic stops, right? Actually, no. The National Institute of Justice is the research agency of the Department of Justice. In 2013, the National Institute of Justice published a study called Race, Trust, and Police Legitimacy. 3 out of 4 black drivers admitted that they were stopped by the police for a legitimate reason. Blacks, compared to whites, were on average more likely to commit speeding and other traffic offenses. The Institute wrote, seatbelt usage is chronically lower among black drivers. If a law enforcement agency aggressively enforces seatbelt violations, police will stop more black drivers. The NIJ's conclusion? These numerical disparities result from differences in offending. In other words, not because of racism. Similarly, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration also found that blacks violate traffic laws at higher rates than whites in every offense, whether it's driving without a license, not wearing a seatbelt, not using a child safety seat, or speeding. Is there still racism in America? Of course there is. But racism is not in America's DNA. Recent history and a lot of research and data prove it. As liberal Harvard sociologist Orlando Patterson said, America is now the least racist white majority society in the world, has a better record of legal protections of minorities than any other society, white or black, offers more opportunities to a greater number of black persons than any other society, including all of those of Africa. Patterson, by the way, is black. I'm Larry Elder for Prager University. Years ago, I interviewed Kwesi Mfume, then the president of the NAACP. As between the presence of white racism and the absence of black fathers, I asked him, which poses the bigger threat to the black community? Without missing a beat, he said, the absence of black fathers. It was President Barack Obama who said, we all know these statistics, that children who grow up without a father are 5 times more likely to live in poverty and commit crime, 9 times more likely to drop out of school, and 20 times more likely to end up in prison. The Journal of Research on Adolescence confirms that even after controlling for varying levels of household income, kids in father-absent homes are more likely to end up in jail, and kids who never had a father in the house are the most likely to wind up behind bars. In 1960, 5% of America's children entered the world without a mother and father married to each other. By 1980, it was 18%. By 2000, it had risen to 33%, and 15 years later, the number reached 41%. For blacks, even during slavery, when marriage for slaves was illegal, black children were more likely than today to be raised by both their mother and father. Economist Walter Williams has written that, according to census data from 1890 to 1940, a black child was more likely to grow up with married parents than a white child. For blacks, out-of-wedlock births have gone from 25% in 1965 to 73% in 2015. For whites, from less than 5% to over 25%, and for Hispanics, out-of-wedlock births have risen to 53%. What happened to fathers? The answer is found in a basic law of economics. If you subsidize undesirable behavior, you will get more undesirable behavior. In 1949, the nation's poverty rate was 34%. By 1965, it was cut in half to 17%, all before President Lyndon Johnson's so-called war on poverty. But after that war began in 1965, poverty began to flatline. From 1965 until now, the government has spent over $20 trillion to fight poverty. The poverty rate has remained unchanged, but the relationship between poor men and women has changed dramatically. That's because our generous welfare system allows women, in effect, to marry the government. And this makes it all too easy for men to abandon their traditional moral and financial responsibilities. Psychologists call such dependency learned helplessness. How do we know that the welfare state creates disincentives that hurt the very people we're trying to help? They tell us. In 1985, the Los Angeles Times asked both the poor and the non-poor whether poor women often have children to get additional benefits. Most of the non-poor respondents said no. However, 64% of poor respondents said yes. Now, who do you think is in a better position to know? Tupac Shakur, the late rapper, once said, "I know for a fact that had I had a father, I'd have some discipline, I'd have more confidence." He admitted he began running with gangs because he wanted the things a father gives to a child, especially to a boy: structure and protection. Your mother cannot calm you down the way a man can, Shakur said. You need a man to teach you how to be a man. In my book, Dear Father, Dear Son, I write about my rough, tough World War II Marine Staff Sergeant dad. Born in the Jim Crow South of Athens, Georgia, he was 14 at the start of the Great Depression. Growing up, I watched my father work 2 full-time jobs as a janitor. He also cooked for a rich family on the weekends and somehow managed to go to night school to get his GED. When I was 10, my father opened a small restaurant that he ran until he retired in his mid-80s. He was never angry or bitter and insisted that today's America was very different from the world of racial segregation and limited opportunity in which he grew up. Hard work wins, he told me and my brothers. You get out of life what you put into it. You can't control the outcome, but you are 100% in control of the effort. And before blaming other people, go to the nearest mirror and ask yourself, what could I have done to change the outcome? This advice shaped my life. Fathers matter.
Hi, I'm Elisha Kraus, Director of Outreach here at PragerU. To have this video reach more people, please consider a donation.
What are the 5 biggest issues facing blacks in America? Here's my list. Problem number 5, the victim mentality. Nothing holds someone back more than seeing himself as a victim. Why? Because the victim is not responsible for his situation. Everything is someone else's fault. And the victim sees little chance of improving his life. How can he get ahead if someone is holding him back? All this makes the victim unhappy, frustrated, and angry. This is how too many blacks see themselves, as victims. So much so that their victim status becomes their primary identity and their ruling ideology. I call it victimology. Unfortunately, many black churches preach this victimology. Many black parents pass it on to their children. Inner city schools teach it to their students, and the black media reinforce it. Meanwhile, the NAACP and other black grievance groups fundraise on it. Problem number 4, lack of diversity. Blacks repeatedly demand an honest dialogue or debate about race. But how can there ever be an honest dialogue about race between blacks and whites when there is virtually no honest dialogue between blacks and blacks? It's hypocritical. And if a black doesn't think whites are ultimately responsible for black people's problems, they're labeled a sellout, Uncle Tom, or race traitor. As long as this type of groupthink exists, race reverence of the Al Sharpton, Jesse Jackson type will continue to be celebrated, while independent black thinkers such as Professors Thomas Sowell and Walter Williams will be shunned. The honest race dialogue and debate that first has to happen is not between blacks and whites, but between blacks and blacks. We demand diversity from others, but need to practice it ourselves where it really matters, in thought, opinion, and even political affiliation. Problem number 3, urban terrorism. As just about everyone knows, but too few talk about publicly, in majority black cities, violent black-on-black crime is rampant. A Department of Justice study from 1980 through 2008 revealed that blacks accounted for almost half of the nation's homicide victims, 47.4%, and more than half of the offenders, 52.4%, all while being 13% of America's population. The Tuskegee Institute conducted a study of all known lynchings of blacks that occurred between 1882 through 1968. 6-year span, which is essentially the post-Civil War report, in 1965, nearly 25% of black children were born to unwed mothers. The report's author, Daniel Patrick Moynihan, said this was a disaster in the making. He was, of course, vilified by so-called black leaders and their progressive allies. But he was right. Today, the out-of-wedlock birth rate is nearly 75% and even higher in some urban areas. To be clear, baby daddies share this responsibility with baby mamas. Yet, while baby daddies are blamed and rarely shown compassion, baby mamas are rarely blamed and receive both compassion and support. This lopsided dynamic and the previously listed pathologies stem directly from the number one problem facing the black community. Problem number one, unquestioning allegiance to so-called progressive policies. Unwavering loyalty to progressive liberal policies is the primary reason these dire conditions persist. It both makes them possible and perpetuates them. It's no coincidence that progressivism is the common thread that binds predominantly black cities where single-parent homes, failing schools, rampant poverty, and crime predominate. Look at cities like Detroit, Philadelphia, and Baltimore. They've been run by progressive Democrats for decades. If their liberal policies were at all effective, these cities should have become models of economic growth and prosperity. Instead, they're models of dysfunction. By fostering and exploiting the victim mentality, discouraging self-examination, subsidizing baby mamas, and making excuses for black thugs, so-called progressive policies don't alleviate the problems that afflict the black community. They aggravate those problems. You may have noticed that racism did not make the list. Why not? It's simple. There will be no solution to the problems afflicting black America until more blacks recognize that the issues plaguing our community are ultimately self-inflicted. Does racism exist? Sure. But there are other problems far more serious. And waiting until there are no more races will mean waiting and making excuses forever. I'm Talib Starks for Prager University.
Hardly a day goes by that someone of prominence, a politician, a talk show host, an entertainer, doesn't call some conservative, or conservatives generally, racist. Here are typical examples. The chairman of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, Congressman Steve Israel. To a significant extent, conservatives are animated by racism. TV newscaster Ed Schultz. This is what the Republican Party stands for. Racism. Oprah Winfrey. There's a level of disrespect for the office that occurs in some cases, and maybe even many cases, because the president is African American. There's no question about that. To call someone a racist should be a very serious matter. A racist is a person who believes that one race is inherently superior or inferior to another. It's not intelligence or goodness that determines an individual's worth. It's his or her skin color. To say that racism is foolish and stupid, not to mention evil, is to understate the case. But according to many of their critics, conservatives are that stupid and that evil. But with few exceptions, conservatives are neither. So why is the charge even made? The answer is primarily political, to maintain black support for liberals and liberal policies. To back up this charge, the accusers point to conservative policies. So let's examine some conservative policies to see if they are indeed racist. The long-standing conservative opposition to affirmative action is a good place to start. It was Democratic President John F. Kennedy who first used the term affirmative action in 1961. But affirmative action, in the way we think of it now, wasn't implemented until 1970, during the administration of a Republican president, Richard Nixon. The theory was that, because of historical discrimination, blacks were at a competitive disadvantage to other races and ethnicities. To erase that disadvantage, standards that most blacks presumably couldn't meet had to be lowered. One could make the case that this policy had some utility when it was first put in place, but that was a long time ago. The conservative position is that blacks have repeatedly proven they can compete with anyone without the benefits, demeaning benefits, I might add, of lower standards. There are countless examples of black success in every field at every level. The policy is no longer necessary. But the conservative argument goes further. Study after study shows that, in the case of college admissions, Affirmative action actually hurts many blacks. By lowering admission standards for blacks and some other minority students, colleges set many of these students up for failure. They get placed in schools for which they're not prepared. And high black dropout rates confirm this view. So does common sense. If white students with mediocre SAT scores were admitted to Ivy League schools, they too would be set up to fail. Let's do the math. Conservatives believe that blacks and other minorities are every bit as capable as whites of succeeding as policemen, firemen, businessmen, lawyers, doctors, politicians, and college students. Yet for this belief, conservatives are called racist. The irony, of course, is that those who accuse conservatives of being racist believe that blacks and other minorities are not as capable as whites of succeeding and therefore still need affirmative action, almost a half century after it was first implemented. Let's look at another issue where this contrast between conservatives and those who accuse them of being racist is even more starkly drawn: voter ID. Conservatives say that America should require that every voter present an ID when he or she votes, just as European countries do in order to help keep their elections honest. Are all these democracies racist? Of course not. Yet the accusers say that conservatives who support voter ID are racist. Why do they say this? Because, they argue, it's really a ruse to prevent blacks and other minorities from voting, since many of them just aren't capable of acquiring an ID. Can you get more condescending than that? Let's be real. You need an ID to drive, to fly, to buy a beer, even to purchase some cold medicines. Whites can do it, but blacks can't? Tell me who the racists are again? One more example. It's conservatives who push for school vouchers, which would allow all parents, not just wealthy ones, to choose their children's school. It's the other side that doesn't trust minority parents to select an appropriate school for their children. Why aren't the people who compel black children to stay in terrible schools the racists? At some point, maybe you'll start asking yourself, like I did, who's really obsessed with race? And whose policies really hurt blacks and minorities? Maybe it's not who you think it is. I'm Derek Green of Project 21 for Prager University.
The first week I was in Arizona, the first 2 weeks, of course I had a lot of boxes delivered and stuff like that. And I thought, put the boxes on the road, they'll take the boxes away. Well, they didn't take the boxes away, and it was still on the road. And I'm lazy. So what happened was, one day in my foyer, the way my house is built, it's built in a circle. And then there's an inside to the house before you get inside to the house. And I used to leave that door open. Well, what happened was somebody white took all of my boxes off the street and put it inside of the foyer area, whatever you call that. I thought that trash people had gotten my stuff, so I'm going out to the foyer one day and I see all these boxes. I'm heated. I start walking around my property, cussing, because I'm thinking the white folks just stuck my garbage back inside my house. A couple of days later, my neighbor, one of my neighbors, he comes through and says, no, I took that stuff off the street because if you had left it there, you would have gotten fined. Bulk trash is only the first Tuesday of every month. He risked his life walking inside of my house to get stuff off the road so I didn't get fined, and he'd never met me. Fast forward to today. 2 times before today. I let my cat out. For some reason, I don't know how to own a cat. The cat wanted to go outside, I let the cat out. I assume the cat know how to get back home. The cat normally comes back home. There's been 2 occasions in which my cat has come back home. White people brought it to me. One of them was telling me about how coyotes will eat the cat. They each brought it back and was like, you just have such a great cat. They introduced themselves to me, let me know what they do. I gave them my card, let them know what I do. Today, I had because you guys know I'm trying to put together the editing bay in my house for when I edit my movie, not only my movie, and every other project afterwards, so I have everything right there. Well, I got a 39-inch monitor that is a 4K monitor. It's 4K state-of-the-art. Apparently, Amazon decided your neighborhood's so nice, we'll just leave it out in the front. They just left this television out in the front. and they delivered it at 12. And you guys know I was going through a bunch of crap today, so all I did was sleep today. I checked my email and it says there's a box that had been delivered. Then my doorbell rings. I get up, it's my neighbor. And my neighbor says, well, this was dropped off to you today and it's just sitting out here. I don't want it to sit out here, don't know what could happen. I don't think anybody will take it. But if you were home, I was just letting you know that I'm the only black person that lives in my neighborhood. I'm the only one. And I can understand, I probably get the looks of what is he doing here? He must be some kind of rapper or something like that. So I posted this on my Instagram. Today, when I got home, when I brought home all this crap, one of my neighbors saw me pull in. A few minutes later, he and two other guys came with him. They said they had been looking at some of my stuff because once I gave them the card, they wanted to see who I was, which is smart. They came over and they said, we believe in the Second Amendment as well. We believe that every family should be safe. And we believe in this neighborhood, we all look out for each other. They were literally looking like Navy SEALs or hunters. They had their weapons on them. They said, whenever you leave and go out of town, you let us know. If there's anything that looks out of place, we'll keep an eye on your house. And if you ever need some help, you let us know. When I was in Atlanta, and I lived in Atlantic Station is an affluent area. Blacks in there make a lot of money. Blacks had stolen all of the packages from the concierge desk. Blacks had destroyed the projection screen for the movie room. I lived in another place in Atlanta and I got robbed twice. All black neighborhood. But it was supposed to be a nice neighborhood because the stuff was expensive. I got robbed twice. Now what people are telling us is to look at white folks as the horrible people. White folks haven't been online stalking me. White folks haven't taken pictures of my daughter and put them up. White folks haven't threatened my life. White folks haven't released my address. White folks with families came to introduce themselves in my neighborhood. Black people right now can attest to you that the majority of us, when we live in other neighborhoods, or when we live in our own neighborhoods, we won't even speak. There's something I want you guys to hear. Because when I posted this on my Instagram page, when I thought I would get backlash, I actually got support. Let me see if I can find my phone to read. I posted a picture of my box where it was sitting at outside, the monitor for the box for the monitor, before I brought it in the house. And I said, Amazon wild as hell. They left my 4K monitor outside all day and didn't even ring the doorbell. Here it is 6:45 and it's been out here since noon. Do you know my white neighbor rang my doorbell to tell me it was out here? I'm sorry to say it, but I'm thankful to be the only black person here. It's sad to say, I have black people online trying to steal from me and ruin me, while whites have access to actually do something to me, and they protect me, but they protect my stuff. I thought white supremacy was the enemy, but here I am being stalked and threatened by blacks. While if whites don't like me, they just leave me the hell alone. Fancy that. Fuck American Negroes. In the comments section, instead of hate what I got black people. Black people given the same experiences. Carmet 175 says, my husband was shoveling snow. To the left of our house are African Americans. 2 doors down to the right is a white man. The white man, without being asked to, helped my husband shovel the snow. They engaged in some conversation, and that was that. One of the Africans knocked on our door asking to borrow our shovel. About 30 minutes later, my husband was like, wait a minute. They asked to borrow my shovel. And when he got his shovel back, he said, never again. because they didn't ask to help him shovel his driveway. The white neighbor never asked for anything, but my husband believes in one hand washes the other, and both hands wash the face. We're moving to Canada soon, LOL. Another one says, my UPS man goes out of his way to hide my stuff up here in Northern California, especially during the holidays. I give him a nice bottle of whiskeys the past Christmas. All these things that I'm getting. Another one, black man says, the only time I've had my mail and other stuff stolen from me is when I had a ghetto-ass roommate, rough years ago. He even tried to steal my identity and credit. Since I've been living in a nice suburban residence, it's a shame that I've had no problems. Very few black people. Another person, prolific Heat King, said, real shit. I had a set of white neighbors who would watch my house when I would stay away, even cut my yard sometimes. Been in this house for 4 years, and the black dude next to me has never spoken. Story after story on this thing. You can go read them for yourself. I didn't make them up. Return to Forever said, sad truth, 90% of all the harm that will come to a black man's life will be from another black man. Wake up, y'all. Black woman wrote, I've knocked on my neighbor's door as well. I enjoy living in a white and Asian neighborhood. Delaney Cheeks said, you're a lucky man, Tommy. If that were my crib, Negroes would have snatched that box up and sold it before noon. Right now, I'm being currently stalked by black people. They're releasing my address. Every 5 seconds, they're saying something about my ex-girlfriend. They'll say something about my daughter. They've gotten so low that they've released my grandmother's address. More black folks than you can imagine who, after they state that they don't like me, they continue to make videos. There's a black woman who's been stalking me now for 4 years, three years. She's never let go. I keep begging her. I don't even say anything about the woman. I don't even say the woman's name. Every time I put up a video, she shows up talking about some menstrual licking and all this crap, just over and over again. Every day someone says, he stole that Fatherless America money. Every day they're saying, they're just stalking. Every day you see black men getting killed by other black men. And yet you have black men who are willing to put other black men's address out there because of a difference of opinion. You have black men who refuse to leave other black men alone online, and all they have to do is just not watch my stuff or anybody else's stuff. But they won't. But we're told to watch out for the big bad white man. Again, I've been robbed several times of my property, and never once has it been when I lived in a non-black neighborhood. Ice Cube was one of those people who had decided that he was going to stay in a black neighborhood when he got his money. He changed his tune because he said every week he'd come home, they had stolen his stuff. Black folks are a scourge on the United States, especially to other blacks. And yet nobody wants to say anything about it. When someone does, he's an Uncle Tom and they're gonna kill him. When someone does, he's a coon and they're gonna stalk him. Have you guys noticed that there are videos on YouTube of people talking bad about white people, calling white people the devil? But those same people who are doing that, they're not getting stalked by white people? White people aren't saying they're gonna kill them. White people aren't putting out their addresses. White people aren't all over their comment sections and won't leave them alone. Have you noticed that? There are literally guys on YouTube who talk about the white man being the devil, we need to get back to power, black this, black that, and ain't nobody messing with them. I will never join you guys again in this whole idea of the big bad white man. Because let me tell you something. If it wasn't for the big bad white man, I wouldn't have got the education I got. If it wasn't for the big bad white man, I would still be living in the hood because the big bad white man gave my mother a job when nobody else would. Nobody black has ever hired my mother in 60+ years of her life. No black person has ever hired her for any job. No black person has ever given her a loan. No black person has ever did anything for my mom of any significance. No black person gave us an apartment, nor a house, nor a car. When I was in high school, it was a white man who would take me back and forth to practice. It was a white man who would buy me shoes. When I got out of college, One of my first big jobs was at IBM. It was a white man that gave me that job. The white man hired me and I was not qualified. I continue to point out places where white men have helped pretty much every one of you who have something, and yet these pro-blacks are trying to convince you to hate white people. Think, why would you hate someone because someone else does when there's no alternative? There's no black alternative. There's no place where, okay, we hate white people. Let's go get a black job, a black corporation, a black neighborhood where it's safe and where it's friendly and where black people aren't messing with each other. We don't even have the ability as black people to have disagreements on being Republican or Democrat. If you're a black person and you're a Republican, you're a sellout and you're gonna get stalked. If you're a black person and you don't walk around and do the dumbest crap, you're not real and you're gonna get threatened by the people who are real. I want you to understand that while people yelling that the white man is the devil, what has the black man done for you? When you walk in a white neighborhood, are you fearful of white people? Most of you are not. But when you walk in an all black neighborhood, you are. Corey Holcomb said to me, "He from Chicago, nigga." But you've never heard a white person say, "I'm from Chicago," as if that's supposed to frighten you. When white people say they're from LA, they don't say it like how black folks say they're from LA. When white folks say they're from Atlanta, they don't say it like how black folks say they're from Atlanta. See, black folks like talking about impoverished areas and areas where you should not feel safe. One of the guys from Birmingham told me, "You better never come through Birmingham, nigga. You won't get out alive." I said it's probably the same thing with the Amazon jungle too, which is why I would not visit the Amazon jungle. But at least those are animals, so you understand they don't know better. Black folks supposed to know better. Apparently they don't either. So you can't get me to hate white people like how you hate white people. Don't bring up slavery, because the biggest slavery right now is the mental slavery that black folks suffer. Don't try to get me to hate white people. You do it. And all you do is hate white people with your words online. As soon as a white person gives you a job, you take it. As soon as a white person gives you a loan, you take it. I've realized right now there's a white girl, sweet girl, father's a Major League Hall of Famer. And that woman didn't ask me for a thing. That woman offered stuff to just hang out. I have black girls who hung out with me, and after they hung out, one of them said, "Well, I took off work from hanging out with you, so can you give me the money that I would have missed work when I hung out with you?" Black people are not friendly to black people. I don't even think black people are good for black people right now. If you want to hate white people, fine. But even your black movies have to be distributed by white companies because you don't have a black distributor. Even you get happy and post photos about how you've been on a white television show. But I thought white people were so bad. Remember, don't let black folks convince you to be around them, because that's usually when your life will end or you will lose everything you've built or gained. We're not good people, especially each other, period. From now on, you won't hear me, I don't care what you call me, coon, whatever. I will not align myself with a group of people who will start taking pictures of my daughter and putting them on the internet, who will release my name, address, record, parents, grandparents, all over my opinion. There's an evil in the United States, and it affects black people every day. And that evil is called niggers. If I was you, I'd stay away from them as much as possible. I've had my fill. I'm done.